everybody, welcome back to the Jim Feist Handicapping Show here at Dom DeMarco's Pizzeria and Wine Bar, located at 9785 West Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas on a beautiful end of February day. I love wearing shorts and short sleeves. Jim, you are back from a little trip to Cleveland, Ohio, where it was anything but shorts and short sleeves.
Well, I go to the Cleveland Clinic for twice a year for checkups and stuff. That's great doctors, great facility. So I had a 7 o'clock appointment last Monday morning. I get out of the car at 6:30 to check in. 9 degrees and windy as hell. I wanted to get back in the car and go to the airport and leave. I
mean, more importantly, all the checkups, everything okay?
Everything, it was great. Everything was great. Once I survived freezing myself to get into the building, I was fine. The thing was, for the whole week, the high was 17. So that was a week.
And if you added the 9 and 17 in the whole week, you probably still don't get to 75 or 80 we're at.
No, we have to multiply by a lot.
Well, joining us back on the panel is somebody who was with us a couple times during the football season, but he actually really into college basketball. He worked with the Pacers and IU, and that's Wes Reynolds. Wes, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back with you, Tommy and Jim. Thanks for having me again.
You are welcome. We're going to get into some March Madness stuff. We're going to talk a lot of college basketball. And Jim, I'm going to start with you. I'm just curious on your take. I have an idea where you're going to go, and then I'm going to see what Wes says. But here are the top teams this week from the AP. We have Auburn, Duke, Florida, Houston, Tennessee, Alabama, St. John's, Michigan State, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. Is anybody outside those teams going to make the Final Four?
Oh.
Or is that the Final Four in that group right there?
Well, obviously they're favored to be there, but I think there's a lot of teams that could surprise, and it's going to really come down to the flaws in basketball today is the three-point shot because it's fickle. So you can hit 40% one night, you can hit 20% the next night. And if they're playing a lot of games in a week or in a couple weeks and the fatigue sets in, the legs get tired, the three-point shots don't go in. That's one of the factors that could affect it. So with the fickleness of that, yes, there's teams from the outside that could get hot for 4 or 5 games and make a run. And Wes is one of the better handicappers there is. I follow him a lot. And I know that he's done a lot of deep dives into this, so I'm going to let him answer the rest of that.
What do you think, Wes?
Well, I think to Jim's point about the three-point shot, it's absolutely the equalizer. And I was actually watching a video with Danny Hurley, who, of course, the coach of the 2-time defending champions at UConn. Probably not going to get there this year. They're a little bit down from the usual standard. But Danny Hurley said something that I think a lot of people ignore because you always hear the cliche defense wins championships, right? Wrong. Actually, it's offense that wins in college basketball. And what Danny Hurley said is, you recruit offense and you teach and coach defense. And that's what I think you have to do. And, you know, when I look at the criteria of who can actually win the national championship, there could be a surprise in the Final Four. Look, we saw Sister Jean and Loyola a few years ago. There's always kind of like one surprise. It's very rare that you get all 4 number 1 seeds in a Final Four. But when it comes to like winning a national championship, there's a criteria that I've been using, and it goes back to 2002, and there's only one team that didn't qualify. That was 2014 UConn, when Kevin Ollie was the coach, when Shabazz Napier went nuts, when they should have lost in the first round of St. Joe, and they got lucky and they just got on that run, and, you know, sometimes you have that, but you want a team. I don't know if anybody follows the Pomeroy rankings.
I do, big time, every day.
The Ken Pom, and what you want to look at, Tommy, is you want to look at teams that are in the top 25 in offensive efficiency. Plus, if you add the offense and the defense, if that number is under 50, those are the teams that can win the national championship. So you mentioned some of them. Auburn would qualify. Duke would qualify. Florida, Alabama, Wisconsin would actually qualify. Houston, Gonzaga, Texas Tech, Maryland, Clemson, Arizona, Michigan State, Iowa State. Those would be the teams today, and actually Louisville as well, because they're right at 50. Those are the 13 teams as we sit here today, and look, it could switch over the next couple of weeks before the pairings come out on Selection Sunday. Those are the teams where it feels like the national champion is going to come from one of those groups. And look, there's a lot of teams I didn't list there that are very good, like Tennessee. Tennessee just doesn't have the offensive ranking right now. Defensively, I think they're number 1 in the country. St. John's, another team. Great defense. but I worry if they can hit shots in the NCAA tournament.
You know, Wes, you brought up a couple points there, and I'm going to come back to Texas Tech. But with Tennessee and St. John's particularly, two teams that can absolutely defend it. But as you just mentioned, I don't know if they have a guy, if it gets down to the clutch, that can make a shot. Because in the NCAA tournament, you have to have somebody you can rely on that can hit you a shot when you need it. Somebody that you know, I can get the ball in his hands and they can hit me a shot. I don't know if St. John's has a go-to guy for that, and I don't know if Tennessee has a guy for that.
Tennessee might with Chaz Lanier, but it's not like last year. Remember Dalton Connect, the Laker who they tried to trade in that deal, but that deal fell through, so now he's back with the Lakers. But Lanier's a good three-point shooter, about 41%. But to your point about St. John's, and look, I don't want to besmirch Rick Pitino. I don't want to besmirch an Italian here at Dom DeMarco. I know what's good for me. And Rick Pitino is still one of the best strategists at the game. He's in his 70s.
Yes.
Still has a lot of energy. If you watch the show, if you get Vice on your satellite, your DirecTV, or your cable, Cox here in Las Vegas, there was a show on Vice called Red Storm Rising, which is chronicling that St. John's season. And just the energy, and look, he gets in these kids' backsides too.
Yeah.
He gets after them, and they listen and they defend. But I worry about if they're going to fall into that like Iowa State syndrome the last couple of years, even though Iowa State better offensively, or like Houston, where you get that one night in the NCAA tournament and they can't make a shot.
Now,
and that's all it takes.
Houston this year has some shooters.
Yeah, they
which
really
they
do.
have not had the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what makes them very real to me.
You know what?
Houston's legit, absolutely.
I've said this to both of you, to many people. If there are college basketball guides, they will give us Auburn versus Houston somewhere in the tournament, because I would love to see that matchup between Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson, with those two teams that are physical and defendant, both can play on the offensive side as well. I would love to see that.
Yeah, no question about it. And what Auburn likes to do, obviously, they like to press. It's not necessarily to speed up the game; it's to slow down the other offense. And they've wasted 6-7 seconds just trying to get it across the 10-second line, then all of a sudden they have less time to set up an offensive set. So that's what Auburn tries to do. And if they get a turnover and get a steal, so be it. And Houston, grinds it a little bit more offensively. If you watched them Monday night against Texas Tech was shorthanded.
Yep.
Houston was really slowing the ball. They get down there and then they pull it back out and they run a set, because they're so good defensively. And, this goes back to memory when I was a grad student at IU. That's when Kelvin Sampson was still coaching the Hoosiers. And he spoke to our class, and it didn't end well for Kelvin in Bloomington. But nevertheless...
For something that's legal now.
Yes. He made a very salient point, though, when he said about defense. He goes, that's just an attitude. It's just effort. I can teach you to do that. And Houston, they just defend so hard, and that's what you've worried about them in the past, because they spend so much energy on defense that it's like their legs are dead offensively. But I think this year, to what Jim said, they've got some good three-point shooters, and they're absolutely legit this year.
One thing with Houston I've noticed, I've watched them many times this year, because they put so much pressure on the offense and they amp it up on the defensive side, they start wearing teams down. And somewhere around under the 8-minute timeout, down to about the 4-minute timeout, they start imposing their will on teams. They took it away from Arizona in Arizona. Arizona led that entire game, and they imposed their will.
Yeah.
They got the lead, and it was over. They did the same thing with Texas Tech the other night, even though, like you said, they were shorthanded. They got the lead around the 7-minute mark. They pushed it out, and they imposed their will, and that game just got spread out. Once they start wearing you down and they get ahead of it, Kelvin Sampson knows how to grind it out, kill possessions, take the clock down, so it makes it a must score for you on the other side.
How big is coaching to this? I mean, to me, I start with the coach.
Mm-hmm.
I do as well.
And I think the coach that's been there, been in the heat of the battle before in the big games, makes a big difference. Is there anybody out there that has the team but not the coach with the experience?
Yeah, when you're looking at maybe BYU in experience in terms of the coach, I think Young is very good, but just hasn't been there before. And there's something to be said for that, Jim. Guys that have been in this situation before, and they know, because every coach, I don't care how good the coach is, gets knocked out in the NCAA tournament. Look, I'm an IU guy wearing the logo here. Bob Knight got knocked out in the first round. Mike Krzyzewski got knocked out in the first round. Every coach, that's ever accomplished anything has been knocked out early in the NCAA tournament. And that's just variance. That's just the event, You don't shoot the ball well, or you get a kid in foul trouble, or you get a bad whistle from an officiating crew. But in terms of like the young, inexperienced coaches, I would say maybe Gates at Missouri, who I think has done a really good job with them,
Tremendous job.
but not a lot of tournament experience. The guy from BYU I mentioned, Kevin Young.
Here's another
not
one.
a lot of tournament experience.
Grant McCaslin at
Yes.
Texas Tech.
Who's great.
Fantastic coach. Love Grant McCaslin. They have the team that could sneak in the Final Four, but can Grant handle that kind of pressure?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and that's what you're concerned with. Some of these guys that have maybe mid-major experience, like Louisville. I think Pat Kelsey, who did a great job at Winthrop, part of that Xavier tree, that old Skip Prosser tree dating back to Xavier. Very good coach, but have they probably overachieved at 22-6? The Cardinals, yeah, because it was a brand new team. It was all transfers because they were a disaster. They were a horror show the last couple of years, and now you see them at 22-6. Impressive record, albeit in a really down ACC.
Jim, I'll go here with you on both sides of that. Here's a guy that's been to the tournament many times, and in my opinion, can't coach in the tournament when it starts past the first weekend, and that's Rick Barnes. Rick Barnes can find a way to get to the Sweet 16 and find a way to screw it up before he gets to the Final Four. For whatever reason, he's not coached well in that second round. To answer your question, here's a team that's got it. Florida's got it, but I don't know if Todd Golden's the coach for that team to get him to the Final Four. They're good enough, and Golden's good, but he's got so much stuff hanging over his head, even though they say it's been pushed aside. As they start getting closer, I'm waiting for the media to start bringing all this stuff back up around, and we'll see what happens then.
Well, they're under a lot of pressure. I mean, there's a lot of pressure. You get it from your school, you got it from the players, you get it in the media, you get there, and then all that stuff from the past, when you don't have that kind of history or you have a negative history, is going to creep up, and it's when you start losing sleep. I mean, Florida laid an egg at Georgia just last night, and I give them credit for making a comeback in the second half and taking the lead in the last minute. But I think that's positive for them because they came out flat. It's a rivalry, Georgia and Florida. We know how that is, and I talked about that with Mark Lawrence just a little while ago on our show, and it comes into play. But coaching is big. These kids. I mean, look at Rick Pitino. This guy wins everywhere he goes.
Including Greece.
It's got to be the coach. You can't say it's always the players. It's got to be the coach.
Jim, you raised a good point about Florida, Georgia last night. Of course, Georgia needed that because Georgia, now we're starting to get, if you're watching ESPN, you're watching all the different networks, now we're starting to get the daily updates of who's in, who's out of the NCAA tournament. Last four in, first four out, next four out. And Georgia is one of those many teams. So you do get a little bit of tax, especially if a team is a favorite. You get a little bit of a tax that's already accounted for in that line of, oh, this team's got to win if they want to get selected, if they want to move up a little bit on that bracket line. Now, Georgia was an underdog last night and ended up getting there outright, and there's a couple in those spots later on tonight's card, including Texas. But the coaching absolutely, I think, is the great equalizer. And then can you have a guy make a shot like what you mentioned, Tommy, about Rick Barnes? Rick Barnes, another coach, won everywhere he's been. Providence, Clemson, Texas, Tennessee, George Mason even. Won everywhere he's been, but he's never won that big one. He's never gotten that Final Four. Almost got there last year, but they ran into Purdue, and that was the best team Matt Painter's had probably ever in his tenure up there in West Lafayette.
Who had a bad reputation also.
Yeah, and he's a terrific coach.
Yeah.
He just, Gene Cady, who is his mentor, had that. It's like, well, he never, quite got to the Final Four and won the big one. Who's a terrific Hall of Fame coach, but a lot of this too is tournament variance, and it's all about what Jim said at the top of this program: 3-point shooting. Do you have kids that can make shots for you? Does Tennessee have that? That's where they're a little bit, because they could be a Final Four team too if their offense just improves over the last couple weeks.
Now, we talk about 3-point shooting, and it will fail you as your legs get more and more tired after playing back-to-back games under pressure situations. What top couple teams do you think have more going for them besides a good night from 3-point land? Like Auburn, I think, can beat you on the inside. I think Houston could beat you on the inside. Teams like that could overcome a cold night from outside.
As Captain Obvious as this would sound, I think you got to throw Duke in there too,
Yes.
because this Duke team is a little bit different than what we've seen. They always have talent, right?
Cooper
They're
Flagg is a generational player.
Cooper Flagg is, going to be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft this summer, and they've got a couple other freshmen that are probably going to be in the lottery or at least in the first round. One of the things that's impressed me about Duke, they've had, these one and dones going back to Kay and now with John Shire for years, but these kids actually guard. And that's the thing about Duke. They haven't always guarded because Mike Krzyzewski, Matt Human's favorite coach, who just arrived here, Dom DeMarco's, Mike Krzyzewski often said it takes a year to learn how to play defense when you're going up from high school and prep school to college. Well, these kids right away have guarded. They're number 4 in defensive efficiency.
I was just going to say, last time I looked in KenPom, they were one of the top teams with offense and defense efficiency combined.
2 and 4, offense and defense respectively.
How much does strength of schedule come into play for you?
It does. I think you have to certainly look at it, these teams that really tested themselves in the non-conference. And what I look for that, though, in the tournaments, like in the first round, for some of these upsets, some of these mid to low majors, these 12, 13, 14 seeds, can they win a game because they're battle tested? And I think you do have to look at that. Some like the SEC is clearly number 1. I hate to say that as a Big Ten guy, but the SEC clearly the number 1 conference in America. You may get 14 teams.
You might.
There is a possibility you get 14 teams in an 18-team league out of that conference. And the ACC, as much as I sound Duke's praises, not a lot of teams really good in the ACC. Clemson's
about the only one.
Louisville's solid, but everybody else, like, I watched the Duke game at Miami thinking, okay, maybe that might be a flat spot for Duke. They just put 110 on Illinois in Madison Square Garden. Miami's so short-handed. There's some really bad teams in the ACC. Miami's really bad. Syracuse is way down. Florida State's not very good. NC State's way down. So you look at that bottom. Then you got Stanford and Cal, who are, kind of overmatched in the ACC, being their first year. So that's where you wonder about Duke. It's like, have they been getting fat and happy off this bad competition? Now, I think Duke can probably overcome that, though.
I agree. And before I get into some of the games tonight, a team that you texted me about earlier today, Jim, is a team that I think has not gotten the due justice it's deserved. It's currently projected as a 5 seed, and that's Oregon. They just upset Wisconsin. They're going to play USC this weekend at home. They pretty much have this week off. Dana Altman, for whatever reason, I've always noticed this about his teams. He does this kind of the same thing as what Calipari does. They make some kind of adjustment or a switch in January that comes into effect in February, and their teams start to peak at the right time. Now, Calipari doesn't have the players to do it this year, but Altman's team all of a sudden is starting to play a lot better, and every game I'm noticing they're getting a little bit better and a little bit better. They could be a dangerous team in the Big Ten tournament.
Well, that game when they went to Michigan, that was very impressive. He did turn that around. But this is one of the things. We have these teams that are going to different venues this year because of the different realignments and stuff. So you get like a Rutgers going out to play UCLA and USC or something like that. They've never been to that facility. They've never been on that, and they're coming from 9-degree temperature to 70 or 80 degree temperature. I mean, the kids are saying, well, "Why didn't I go here? I have to play from there." So, I mean, you have a lot of things going on with these players that came out of the portal that are blending now, and these good coaches, I think, have figured out how to blend them, and the coaches that are not quite at that level have not figured it out. And some of these teams, like Altman's a great coach.
Yeah.
You can't take anything away from him. These are anytime you have a coach that can turn a team around like that, you got a dangerous player. You got a dangerous club.
And I'll say one thing for Oregon too, and you mentioned it, Tommy. Right now, Oregon I think is 8th in the Big Ten standings. That's a dangerous team in the Big Ten tournament. If you're Michigan State or Michigan or Wisconsin on that one line, you win the regular season on that Friday in Indianapolis. Oregon could knock them off, and they could be a team like on a futures market that you could bet for the Big Ten tournament, because one of the things, and we saw this in the football season, the 4 new teams that came from the RIP, pour one out for the Pac-12, that came into the Big Ten, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC. The travel disadvantage, and Mick Cronin from UCLA has complained about it, and it's seen as whining, but it's also accurate. The travel is harder for them because they have to go east multiple times. And the East Coast schools only have to go maybe one time. Mm-hmm. And you saw that in the football, these teams that travel west to east and these time zone differences, you could often go against them and make some money. But now you get later in the season and Oregon is more used to it, especially now when you have one site for a conference tournament. That's a team that can go on a run. And Dana Altman, look, the master of adjusting, and he's game plan specific. He's not committed to, hey, I'm a man coach, I'm a zone coach. I'm going to go with what works. And that's what he does in Oregon. Look, they got 4 seniors, and their best player is probably the sophomore kid, Shellstad, who is from right there in West Lynn, Oregon. So that is an absolute dark horse, I think. I don't know how far they can go in March, but I think they could at least make a second weekend.
I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a second weekend. And what Dana does well, as Cronin does as well, is they know how to grind out a game. They will grind you and grind you and grind you. Another team, just like these teams, will not go away. It seems like we should be having them down 10 or 11, and we're down 4 because they've just been grinding, and it seems like every loose ball they can't get their hands on just because of the way Altman teaches those guys to play.
And then they get in those grinder games, which speaks to if you're an in-game bettor, where you can bet those unders, and then you got to hold on for dear life, though, because the foul fest is coming in the final minute and a half, and it's like, oh my God, stop fouling. Now, in the NCAA tournament, they're going to foul to the end. You know, it's not like regular season where, okay, you got down 8. All right, good game, see you down the road. No, it's your season on the line. So they're gonna, these conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament, they're gonna foul to the absolute bitter end.
Let's stay in the Big Ten and talk about games tonight. Michigan State at Maryland. Maryland's a 4-point favorite. Maryland has not lost at home since November when they lost to Marquette. They think they've won 7 out of 8 and 4 in a row. Michigan State's coming in. Jim or Wes, do you like this game at all, or any part of this game?
I took 4.
You took 4 of Michigan State.
I took 4. You know, and Maryland betting against a team that doesn't lose at home, I mean, that's a tough battle. But these are big games, and good coaching. I think they're going to coach it up, both sides. I think it's going to be a close game.
Well, and I haven't bet this game, but you know kind of what some of these teams now, what the plan of attack is against Michigan State, because Indiana actually did it and won up there in the Breslin Center, is you got to zone this team. This team can't really shoot the 3 very well. They're under 30%. Maryland, a strong man team, so I think that they would show some zone look. Maryland, by the way, does shoot the 3 well, but they don't shoot it a lot. Their volume is like way down, one of the lowest in major college basketball. They've got a kid that's probably going to be in the lottery, Derek Queen, who has been terrific offensively, even been better than advertised. He was on that number 1 team in high school, Montverde Academy, with Liam McNeely at UConn. But I would lean with Jim, though. I think 4. It seems to be the right number, but Michigan State. Look, this is the old cliche: Tom Izzo in March or Tom Izzo in February. And this team, I think, has been ahead of schedule. I thought this team was really going to struggle, and even though they can't shoot the 3, they're finding ways to win.
Well, he's a great coach. I mean, this goes back to the coaching.
I mean, for me, if I was going to do anything with this game, and I'd probably stay away from it, I would take Maryland on the money line because of the fact
we
that
have a hand raiser over here, and I cannot read his lips. He's trying to talk that way, and I can't pick it up. Hi, Ray.
Hey guys, big fan of the show.
What did you want to ask?
Where are you at?
I mean, 150. I mean, I see 74, 71.
Oh, 150 over.
Jeez.
Oh, okay.
What do you think's gonna happen over there? Who they got that shoots 3-pointers over there? What's going on over there? Wes.
This does.
Under?
I would lean that way. This does kind of seem like, you know, it's a grinder possession because, oh, by the way, now Maryland's 11-5 right now, so they're 2 games back. So you look at winning the Big Ten. Michigan State and Michigan are tied, 13-3. Wisconsin 12-5. Maryland 11-5. Boy, it seems like fast-paced early, and then maybe you get to the final 5 minutes, and all of a sudden these are 25, 30-second possessions. So could slow down, could be a spot for an in-game under if they get out to a fast start. But yeah, I think this stays competitive, 1-2 possessions, and then that eliminates some of the fouling. You know, because when it's 1 or 2 possessions, like, okay, they're telling them don't foul. Now, when you get 6, 7, 8 points and above, then it's foul fest time.
Then there goes your under.
Yep.
74-70.
Wes, let me ask you about Ole Miss at Auburn. Auburn opened at 14, down to 13.5, 153 over. I don't particularly like this number, but I do like the over in this game with Auburn at home and Chris Beard, who, you know, he's got Ole Miss going. But for whatever reason, Chris Beard's teams in the past have always been a defensive team. This team seems to be more of an offensive team.
Yeah, they were a little bit better than last year where they couldn't guard anybody.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit better defensively. Look, I'd like my alma mater to consider Chris Beard, but he's got some things that
He'd be a
people are
good fit
concerned
there.
about. He'd win big, and he'd win big. But steep hill to climb is what I was told by some reliable sources there in Bloomington. Auburn, if you look at them, they're number one, I think, but they haven't really been covering these big numbers. Georgia, I know Georgia lost by 12 on Saturday, but I had a bet on Georgia in that one. That game was a single-digit game, really the entire way. And Georgia didn't shoot the ball well at all, but they just grinded it out and played hard, played for their lives. Auburn didn't cover against Arkansas either. This was after the Alabama game where they won. And even against Vanderbilt where they did cover, they got off to a big lead, gave it right back to Vandy down there in Nashville. And then, so I wonder if Auburn's starting to wear the pressure a little bit of being the target.
I'm waiting for them to have a down game. Florida just had theirs. I'm waiting for Auburn because they're due for one.
Maybe it's Ole Miss. I would lean Ole Miss on the number. Ole Miss, by the way, has lost their last two. Lost at home to Mississippi State, got swept by Mississippi State, and then lost at Vanderbilt. So would lean a little bit Ole Miss. I think the number's probably right, though.
Jim, let me ask you about it. You're like St. John's. They're giving 7 on the road at Butler tonight. And what's impressive about St. John's is their last couple games, they've been blowing teams out. Home or on the road, they have just been finding a way to get teams off the floor. You like this game?
Well, yeah, but not the way you think.
Okay, tell me.
So Rick Pitino, I don't know how much of this is real or Rick playing games with which he does that kind of a false lead type thing. He said he might sit a couple of players that are hurt, and I don't remember what the names were that he mentioned. A couple players a little bit, whether they're hurt or tired. He says I might rest some of these two guys. Well, they're coming off the big win, and they're playing this team. Butler can play, so I took the number. I got 7.5 with Butler.
I did the same, actually, 2 for 2 here, because St. John's, look, they beat UConn, and that was the big hype matchup in the Garden on Sunday. So Rick Pitino wanted to kick Danny Hurley's ass. I mean, Danny Hurley's kind of the toast of the town, right?
Yeah, he wants to prove he's the best.
And he's saying, I'm the best coach, right? I'm the best coach in college basketball. And Rick Pitino says, hey, we'll see about that. So they were motivated, St. John's. They were clearly motivated to beat UConn. And by the way, St. John's right now, 2.5 game lead over UConn, or Creighton rather. They are 15-2. So I think one more win, they would essentially cinch it here. And if they haven't already, I kind of like Butler. I think this is a little bit of a down spot for St. John's. Butler, by the way, only lost by 8 up there in Queens earlier this year. Butler's not great. They're 500, but they have won 4 of their last 5. Some rumors if Thad Matta is going to stay on there in Indianapolis, and or they get a replacement. But Butler's got some experience, and they can make 3-point shots. They shoot about 37%. That's one of the better in the country. So I thought 7.5 was a little rich. Maybe kind of a sleepy spot for St. John's.
Let me bring up a game that's got me a little perplexed, and that's Kentucky giving 3 to Oklahoma on the road. The over-under is 161.5. Oklahoma's been playing better as of late, and it seems ever since they have said that Porter's job is on the line, and from people I've been hearing from the inside, it doesn't sound like Porter Moser's going to be there next year. Sounds like Oklahoma wants to make a change, and some people that I know that are close to the situation told me that even if Porter gets the tournament, he may not save his job. He's going to have to at least win a game to save his job in the tournament. So this game's got me perplexed that it's 3.
Well, I'm not too sure that Kentucky's 100% healthy, and I stayed away from it because of that. And if I can't figure out who's going to be on the floor, I did stay away from it.
Yeah, same here. Lamont Butler has been kind of in and out. Looks like Robinson is going to be back. I don't know if Butler is going to play here. Owe, by the way, who's a Kentucky transfer now, was originally at Oklahoma. And to your point, Tommy, about the Sooners, like Porter Moser is a really good coach. X's and O's, really good tactician, but he's not a great recruiter. And and recruit at that level, that kind of concerns me a little bit, maybe for his fate. Like he was great at Loyola. He's part of that Rick Majerus tree.
Yep.
So that he can coach and he can X and O with anybody. But
I've already been heard where his landing place is going to be. I can tell you when we get done where I've heard he's going to end up.
Okay.
I just can't say it out loud, but just to tell you what I've been hearing. And speaking of something else, I just told my brother this on Saturdays. We were going to the UNLV game. I said, Craig Smith is not going to make the season. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I'm telling you, from the people that I've been talking to, he's not going to make the season, and he's now out at Utah. They're going to Arizona tonight. The line's 15.5. Sometimes players will play their ass off for an interim coach tonight. I don't know if I like the number. I don't know what I like about this game, but I'm interested in this because Arizona is at home. And here's what I like about it most. They have to make a statement game here somewhere. And this could be the game they make their statement coming in because they won like 7 or 8 in a row. They've had a couple bumps. I think they need to make a statement for the committee, and this could be the way to do it.
Yeah, Arizona, though, what's their psyche? Because if you watch the game against BYU on Saturday, and I thought BYU was pretty equal. It was a coin flip game, but there was a questionable call there at the end that went Arizona's way. Not some very happy people in McHale Center and BYU. I think, I forget the kid's name, I think it was Mag, and Caleb Love of Arizona got into it at the end. So I wonder if Arizona, if it's like, okay, we're going to go hellfire and brimstone and just beat a team down.
That's what I'm thinking.
Because they've lost 3 of their last 4. Because remember, we were kind of giving up on Arizona earlier this year because they were 4-5, I think, after they lost to UCLA. And it's like, what's Tommy Lloyd doing? You know, what they finally did is they put the Townsend kid off the bench, who's the Oakland transfer, and they started, I think he's from the Netherlands, Visar, the 7-footer, the center, and they put him in the starting lineup, and they played better ever since. So I wonder what it's going to be for Utah if they're going to keep fighting for a guy, because we've seen that actually at my alma mater, Indiana, where I feel like Indiana has played hard.
They have.
They know Mike Woodson is gone, and there's going to be a new coach. And there's also something that you saw on Sunday if you watched the Indiana-Purdue game. Sometimes a coach, when he knows he's out, is a little bit more liberated with all this NIL stuff, because that determines, you know, how much you're playing a kid. You know, you're paying a kid this much money. So he sat a couple guys in the second half against Purdue, or Mike Woodson at Indiana, where he's kind of like liberated. It's like, I don't have to kiss these guys' backsides anymore. I'm out anyway. Screw it. I'm going to try to win. I'm going to try to beat Purdue. You know, that's all that matters. I don't care if I hurt these kids.
That goes back to when he played for Knight.
Yeah.
You got to beat Purdue.
So you wonder how these teams approach it, because it could go one of 2 ways. It could be like, okay, we're going to mail in the season. You know, we're focused on where we're going to transfer. Or it's like, okay, can we rally together and you know, maybe make a little run at the end? So I felt the number was pretty accurate on Arizona.
If anything, I may like the over in this game just a little bit.
Because it takes more energy to play defense than it does to play offense.
Right.
And sometimes, you know, you get that old Fezzik term, happy action fun time, where you get 2 teams that'll go, especially if we're really 2 teams out of it, you know, that are just playing out the straight.
You don't get the new coach bump like you did sometimes in football.
Yeah.
They may not even care.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, they're making travel plans, which means they're where are we transferring?
Because that's something I like to do in the NBA or the NHL. You know, a lot of times it doesn't always work, but you get that new coach angle. And
I said this before we started to the birthday boy here, Tom Collins, who just turned 41 today. You know, that there's 2 types of teams right now.
Is there a multiplier in there?
No, it's 41,
okay.
right on the button.
Okay.
But there's 2 types of teams this type of year. Those that want to continue to play on and those that are ready to go home. And I'm not sure where Utah is. We're going to find out tonight if they want to play for an interim coach or if they're just going to pack it in. I'm not sure. I see Ray Lamarck has obviously got a comment.
I got a futures question.
A futures?
Yeah,
Go ahead with your
I love
futures.
My futures. That's all I do. I love them. You know, Super Bowl did well. All right, so it's kind of a complicated one. 2-part question.
Everything about you, Ray, is complicated.
Exactly. There's nothing simple.
That's why I brought the lawyer. Okay. Best arbitrator in Summerlin. All right, so who do you guys like, honestly, we haven't dabbled on this, in the women's state? To me, it's South Carolina or Connecticut. That's what I'm looking at. I don't care. I'm really leaning Connecticut here with the women's. I'm looking to tag it to this, because I'm already tagging it to Auburn once. Is the best value I'm going to get Houston at 700 right now if I choose Houston? Is this the best number I'm going to get for Houston at plus 700?
Your men's 700.
Men's 700.
I would say so, because the more Houston wins, the more that number's going to change.
Yeah, I like Houston quite a bit, actually.
Is this the best number I'm going to get Auburn at?
Probably, because they're going to be a number 1 seed. Like Houston, maybe you can get better. It depends on how they do in the Big 12 tournament. But if you look at who the number 1 seeds are going to be, Auburn's going to be for sure a number 1 seed. Duke is for sure going to be a number 1 seed. And then you have maybe 3 or 4 teams that kind of contend in that mark. Like Houston could be one of them. Florida could be one of them. Alabama could be one of them. I don't think anybody in the Big Ten is going to be good enough to be on that one line. necessarily this year, nor in the Big East. So you got probably 6 teams for 4 spots. Auburn and Duke have already claimed the 2, so it'll probably stick around maybe 6 or 7-1. I'm guessing for Houston, depending on the seed.
Okay, just one more. If Houston gets the draw and they don't see Auburn in that, we all want to see it. If they don't see them, who could you see Houston getting besides Auburn in their little sector there that could definitely knock them off? Who does Houston knock?
I mean, it's going to depend on matchup, and I mean everything's in matchups when you get the brackets. I mean, without seeing brackets, a team that I think
besides Auburn, who do they not want to see?
I mean, Texas Tech has split with them, and Texas Tech seems to be able to have their number if they see him again. Iowa State does not. Kelvin Sampson's figured out TJ, so I don't think it's Iowa State. If you want a team, could be Tennessee.
Yeah, and maybe Alabama as well, because we know Alabama, not as good defensively, but almost nobody better offensively than Alabama. So you wonder, that's the cool thing about Houston. Now, I think maybe they can overcome it this year, but in the past, they just haven't been able to make enough shots to compete with like really elite offenses. But this year, probably the best offense that Kelvin's had down there.
Yeah, I agree. Let me ask you two both this in another game, last game for tonight in the Mountain West. Utah State at Boise State. This has got a lot of implications on this game. It's at 4.5 at Boise, over under 149. I told Mr. Ray that, who does nothing simple, that if he's looking for a road team tonight that's good enough to win on the road, Utah State would be my pick. I don't know if they're good enough to win at Utah State or at Boise, but they have the team to do it.
I already bet them 4.
You took them?
4.5, yeah.
Utah State very good actually on the road, despite the fact that the home court advantage is really good in Logan. It seems like this has risen a little bit too much. I think Boise State, they're going to want to slow it down. I think Utah State, the better team in transition, and I think really the more dynamic offense. But they did meet earlier in Logan, and what was that score? 81-79, where Utah State had to kind of pull it out late in the end. I would lean toward the Aggies here. I felt that they've been the best team in the Mountain West really all year. I know they're tied there with New Mexico. San Diego State seems like they're kind of figuring it out, but Utah State's got the most dynamic offense in the conference, and if you're giving me, and this number's going up too. This was 3, I think, on the opener.
Yeah, which is surprising. I was lucky to get the 4.5, but I waited long enough to do it, so I was fortunate. I didn't know it would go up that high.
I'm going to throw some games at you guys from Saturday. We'll be back here next week, and just no line, just straight pick who you think guys are going to win. Auburn at Kentucky. I'll take Auburn. Jim, who you like in that game?
Well, again, I'll go back to Kentucky. The health of some of the players, but Auburn's a better team. But I don't know that they have much to play for. I mean, they know where they're going. They know where they are. Who needs the game more, Wes?
Well, I think both are solidly in the tournament, but. Assuming that Auburn handles business, whether they cover or not, they're 13 tonight against Ole Miss. They're probably going to win that game, and that would extend that winning streak to 5. Kentucky would be my lean on the number. I would guess Auburn would be laying like 5 or 5.5 there in Rupp. So big game. I don't know if that's senior day or not for Kentucky. Oftentimes on senior day. And it's actually not, they have one more, but one other angle I want to mention, on senior day, oftentimes you want to go against the home team. Not every single time, because that's an emotional day, especially at a program where you accomplish something.
Trust me, I've been there, it's rough.
Yeah, if it's a program where you're kind of mediocre and you've had a disappointing season, that's your last chance. So you usually get really good efforts out of those teams. But when you've got a team that's like, hey, we've been a Final Four team, and your parents and your girlfriend and your siblings and all your friends are there, and you're crying.
The focus is on the game, yeah.
Exactly. And different teams have different scenarios where they have the ceremony before the game or they have it after the game. You're starting to see it more after the game now, because these kids get emotional and they start out slow and they get down from behind and they're kind of swimming upstream the rest of the game. So that's another thing I think you're going to want to look at. We're starting to get those senior days now with these like low major conferences that are ending their regular seasons this weekend.
West, who do you like just straight up as a pick? Texas Tech at KU on Saturday.
Boy, Kansas, not the vintage Kansas.
No, they are not.
And Bill Self, look, starting to be rumors, and he kind of poo-pooed them the other night, that maybe he's going to retire.
I've heard that many times.
It's like, have you seen your peak with Bill Self? Look, he's brought you a national championship and, set a bunch of records in the Hall of Fame coach and all that. But Kansas, they have not been the vintage Kansas. Like, their defense actually is ranked very high, but they don't have any shooters. They don't have that Grady Dick or those really good three-point shooters that they've always seemed to find this year. Held on, I think they barely covered against Colorado on Monday night. So maybe this will be buy low on Kansas. I don't know if you'll get that unranked favorite over the ranked team. Kansas may even be a very small dog in Lawrence.
This be maybe the players that he's going to retire. Where this is for the coach, and he is.
Could be.
I think Kansas sneaks it out. I think it's a close game. I think Kansas finds a way to win. At Fall Galley.
And is Texas Tech going to be healthy? Because they had 2 starters, by the way, that did miss on Monday night against Houston.
That's another Kentucky issue with players out.
All right, Jim. Alabama at Tennessee.
Well, Alabama's all about, they got to hit the 3-point shot. The other night they couldn't miss. Is this one of those games that are come out with? It's the most fickle stat in the sport, this 3-point shot. You can go 20%, you can go 70%. It's like, it's an exaggeration, but Tennessee's home.
Tennessee's home.
Tennessee is home, and
There's no line yet, but I like Tennessee at home in this game.
I got to take the home team.
And that number 1 defense too, and also their adjusted tempo. We know Alabama is like run up and down the floor. Tennessee 344. It's not 100% true, but I often think that it's easier to slow down a fast team than it is to speed up a slow team. I know that's cliche,
You
but
talk about St. Mary's.
yeah,
Trying to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Tennessee at home, I think, kind of slows this
And
game a little
didn't they
bit.
just give up like 110 to Missouri?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
West Texas A&M at Florida. I mean, Buzz can coach. Does he have enough to go into Florida? And now they're going to come off the loss to Georgia.
Florida's going to come with an
That's
attitude.
what I'm wondering.
Because okay, they get down by a bunch in the first half. I don't know, it was 16 at halftime or something, but it was actually worse earlier than that. And they get 16. They make the comeback. They get back within 1 against Georgia. And that's a big rivalry game. I mean, we know how big Alabama, Georgia, or Florida and Georgia in football. Well, it's the same. It's the same student body. I was impressed with their comeback. I know they got a bad start, and it was a rivalry game. It was a big game for Georgia, but they can play.
So you like Florida at home?
What's the number?
There's no number yet.
I can't.
It's too early. It's too early.
If we're talking, if we're talking
pick a winner.
If we're talking money line, I'm playing Florida.
All right.
Texas A&M, by the way, has lost 2 in a row. They have Vanderbilt at home tonight. As Vanderbilt struggled a little bit on the road, you would think that they would snap that streak. But Texas A&M, that's another team. 6th defensively, but the offense just isn't that good. Their best offense, by the way, is a missed shot because they're number 1 in offensive rebounding in the country. So I always like a team like that that's a better defensive team as an underdog. So that's the way I would lean here. I agree with Jim. You would think the Gators are going to win down there in Gainesville, but Texas A&M, they're a team that I think could be sneaky dangerous, but they just don't shoot the ball very
What would you
well.
make the line?
Probably Florida 5 maybe or 5.5.
I was going to say 4.5. See.
Yeah, because I know the metrics guys like Pomeroy makes it 9, which I think is a little high.
Well, anything up to 5, I would lay it, but after that, then I'm getting away from it.
Here's the last game I'm going to bring up, and I'm calling this must-see TV. Get your popcorn, get your drinks, get your burgers, get your fries, get your wings.
Get your wallet.
And get ready for Arizona and Iowa State, because they're going to roll out the red carpet after Caleb Love hit the half-court shot against them and then beat him in overtime. They are going to wait for the Wildcats to walk in on Saturday. That environment is going to be hostile if there's ever been one. This to me, is going to be a much-watched game. I like Iowa State at home. I think TJ's, they showed his face too many times about how upset he was when Caleb Love hit the shot because he thought he had it in the bag. I think they're going to make a statement at home on Saturday.
I would think so too. And look, Iowa State's a team that I have a future on, better number earlier in the season because I think the offense is better, even though they've had a couple injuries, so they've slipped a little bit. 2 straight losses at Houston, and also last night at Oklahoma State, where they are, I think, were 10-point favorites down there in Stillwater and lost outright. Hopefully TJ keeps his focus for Iowa State, because his agent, Jeff Goodman, a Field of 68 out there floating his name for the Indiana job. By the way, that's something to look at too. All these jobs that are open, some of these media guys and these guys' buddies in the media and these national sports writers, they'll float these guys, for different jobs and whatnot. So you wonder about that focus. But I would like Iowa State here. I think tough to win in the Hilton Coliseum, even though Kansas State got it done a few weeks ago. I think that they probably comfortably beat Arizona on Saturday.
You done with college? Is that what you just said? You talking about done with college?
I'm done with the college games for this week.
What about the pros?
Pros, you're on your own. I haven't watched a pro game in 20 plus years.
I hardly bet any
I don't
sides
watch
and totals,
the NBA
by the
at
way,
all.
in the NBA. I bet mostly player props.
I mean, this is ridiculous. This is a true story. I have an unbelievable winning record in pro basketball, and I absolutely hate the sport.
I was like, send me those
I mean,
plays.
I
need help on sides and totals.
I'm 44-21 in the NBA, and I can't stand to watch the games. I mean, these guys, they come to play, they don't come to play, but there are certain things that seem to be working, and I can't fault it because I keep collecting money on it. But it's you got this trade. Now all of a sudden the Lakers look real if you can. LeBron and Luka can play together.
That was actually a game worth watching last night because of that drama.
Yes, and now if you could get Luka to be a playmaker, which he became last night. I mean, everybody thought he was going to go for 50 points. He gets 19.
Yeah, and at least try to guard.
Triple, double. Yeah, well, he can't do that.
He can try. I don't know if he can do it.
But it's interesting, and we have a weak West Coast. Now maybe the Lakers sneak in now, and then you get Butler goes over to the Warriors, and all of a sudden they can play, and they play great. So now all of a sudden you have a couple teams out there in Oklahoma City. You got Denver, who's could be getting better, possibly, and all of a sudden they become a little bit more competitive, a little bit more interesting to watch on the West Coast. Now, at the East Coast, you got the Celtics, and then you got Cleveland. And I know it's cold in Cleveland. We're not going to talk about that anymore. But they have a great record, just like OKC does. I mean, this is going to be. The NBA can start to get interesting when they get to the playoffs.
I'm going to take your word for it, because like I said, I literally have not watched a game since probably Jordan retired.
Well, you're watching the same. You're watching the same players in college. They're just going to go to the next level.
I don't watch it after that. I stopped watching it.
In the East, it's one of the top 3. It's Cleveland, Boston, or New York. I'm a Pacer guy. I used to work with Pacers, but they're the clear number 4. There's a clear drop off from that top 3.
I mean, you're watching the NBA. I do trivia last night, and
I can't watch the NBA. I can't stand it.
Okay,
watching the final 2 minutes. That's when you're best decided.
I do trivia last night, then I go home because I want to watch the game of St. Louis at Davidson last night. That's where I'm at. I'm a college
that is
junkie.
A die hard, man.
I'm a junkie when it comes to college basketball.
Getting these streams, man, and watching a MEAC game,
right?
Or a Southland game, because you got some cheddar on it.
We got a tournament starting.
Stick around. We're going to give away 3 bottles of J-Lore wine, so get your tickets. Next week on the show is going to be Bertie Frado is going to join us. So we'll be back next week here at noon to cover more college basketball. Jim will give us an update on the NBA and how much more money he keeps winning, because that's obviously what's going on. Give a round of applause for Wes Reynolds, everybody.
Thank you.
Jim Feist. My name is Tommy Canale. We will see everybody back here next week for the Jim Feist Handicapping Show.